The first gunshot felt like an earthquake through Celeste Adams' body as the stagecoach lurched violently beneath her. She gripped the worn leather seat, knuckles white, as the vehicle's peaceful journey toward independence, Missouri turned to chaos in the span of a heartbeat. "Everybody down." The driver shouted from above, his voice barely audible over the thundering hooves and cracking gunfire. Celeste ducked low, pressing her face against the dusty floorboards. The lady beside her, a well-dressed banker's wife from St. Louis, shrieked as another bullet splintered the wooden frame inches from her head. "Outlaws," whispered the elderly man across from Celeste, his weathered face grim beneath his silver beard. "Thought these routes were safe now." The stagecoach pitched wildly as the driver pushed the team to their limits, the horses' frantic gallop sending waves of dust billowing behind them. Celeste clutched her small valise to her chest, everything she owned in the world packed inside its worn leather confines. 2 years of saving, of enduring humiliation and heartbreak, all for this journey west to start anew. And now, outlaws. A final gunshot rang out, followed by a terrible cry from above. The stagecoach veered sharply, nearly tipping onto 2 wheels before crashing back down. Through the small window, Celeste caught glimpses of red rock formations rising against the blue sky, beautiful and indifferent to the violence below. The horses slowed, then stopped. Heavy footsteps approached. "Out, all of you," a gruff voice commanded as the door was wrenched open. 3 men stood outside, dust-covered, unshaven, revolvers drawn. The smallest of them, a man with a vicious scar cutting through his left eyebrow, gestured impatiently with his gun. "Valuables in the bag. Quick about it." The banker's wife sobbed as she removed her pearl necklace. The old man reluctantly surrendered a gold pocket watch. When the outlaw's eyes fell on Celeste, she stared back, defiant despite her racing heart. "I have nothing worth taking," she said, voice steady. The scarred man grabbed her valise, dumping its contents onto the dirt road. Her carefully folded dresses, the daguerreotype of her parents, letters, and the small pouch containing her life savings scattered across the ground. He snatched up the money, chuckling as he weighed it in his palm. "Nothing worth taking, eh?" Celeste lunged forward, reaching for the pouch. "Please, that's everything." The back of his hand connected with her cheek, sending her sprawling into the dust. Stars danced across her vision as pain bloomed through her face. "Stay down if you want to live," he snarled. A distant rumble cut through the air, hoofbeats approaching fast. The outlaws exchanged nervous glances. "Riders coming," said the tallest of them, already backing toward their horses. "Let's move," ordered the scarred man, pocketing Celeste's money. They mounted quickly, disappearing in a cloud of dust just as another rider crested the hill. Celeste struggled to her feet, tasting blood where her lip had split. The stagecoach driver lay motionless on the ground nearby, a dark stain spreading across his shirt. The approaching rider slowed, his stallion snorting clouds of steam in the cool morning air. He sat tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered in a worn leather duster, a Winchester rifle balanced across his lap. "You folks all right?" he called out, eyes scanning the scene before settling on the fallen driver. He dismounted in one fluid motion, moving to check on the injured man. Celeste watched as he pressed fingers against the driver's neck, then shook his head grimly. "Too late for him," he said, rising to his full height. "Those men headed east," the elderly passenger nodded. 3 of them took everything of value." The stranger's eyes, a startling shade of blue beneath the shadow of his hat, found Celeste, still kneeling amid her scattered possessions. "You're bleeding, madam." She touched her lip, wincing. "I'll live." He nodded, then turned back to his horse. For a moment, Celeste thought he meant to leave them, but instead, he adjusted his rifle in its scabbard and retrieved a canteen. "Independence is still 20 miles north," he said, offering her the water. "I'd best get you folks there before those men circle back. You're not going after them?" The banker's wife asked, incredulous. The stranger shook his head. "3 against 1 are poor odds, even for me. First priority is getting you to safety." His gaze swept over them. "My name's Thomas Barrett. I can take 2 of you on my horse. The rest will need to follow with the stagecoach." "The driver's dead," the elderly man pointed out. "I'm aware." Thomas Barrett's expression remained impassive. "Can any of you handle a team?" Silence fell over the group. Celeste looked at the others, the trembling banker's wife, the frail old man, a young clerk who hadn't spoken a word since the attack. "I can," she said finally. Everyone turned to stare at her. "My father ran freight wagons. I grew up handling teams." Thomas Barrett studied her, skepticism evident in his expression. "These horses are spooked. It won't be easy." "Neither is being robbed and stranded in the middle of nowhere," Celeste replied, gathering her belongings back into her valise. "I'll manage." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. He nodded once, then helped move the driver's body, laying him respectfully in the coach before assisting the elderly passenger and the banker's wife onto his horse. "Follow close," he instructed Celeste as she climbed onto the driver's seat. "We'll need to stop before nightfall, but I know a place." The reins felt familiar in Celeste's hands, though her fingers trembled slightly. She drew a deep breath, steadying herself as she surveyed the team of 4 horses. They were still agitated, but no longer in a panic. "Easy now," she murmured, gently flicking the reins. The coach lurched forward. As they headed north, the sun climbed higher, baking the dusty trail. Celeste squinted against the glare, keeping Thomas Barrett's broad back in view as he rode ahead with his passengers. Her cheek throbbed where she'd been struck, and her empty money pouch felt like a phantom weight in her pocket. 2 years of working as a seamstress in St. Louis after James had left her at the altar. 2 years of whispers behind her back, pitying glances, and her former friends slowly drifting away. All that time saving for a fresh start in independence, where her mother's cousin had offered her a place to stay until she found her footing. Now she had nothing. Again. By mid-afternoon, Thomas Barrett signaled for them to turn off the main trail. They followed a narrow path winding between rock formations until reaching a small stream. A crude cabin stood nearby, weathered but intact. "Line shack," he explained as he helped the women down. "Used by ranch hands moving cattle. Should be safe enough for tonight." Celeste's muscles screamed in protest as she climbed down from the driver's bench. Hours in the hot sun had left her dizzy and parched. "You handled those horses well," Thomas said, offering her the canteen again. "Not many women would have taken the reins like that." "Not many women have much choice when necessity calls," she replied, accepting the water gratefully. He nodded, a look of respect crossing his features. "I'll see to the horses and bring in some firewood. There should be basic provisions inside." The cabin was sparse but clean: a table, chairs, 2 narrow cots, and a small cook stove. While the banker's wife continued to weep quietly in the corner, Celeste took stock of their supplies. A sack of beans, coffee, flour, and some salted pork would make a decent meal. As she worked, Thomas Barrett entered with an armload of wood. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to the frontier, setting the logs down before removing his hat. Without the shadow it cast, Celeste could see his face clearly for the first time: sun-bronzed skin, strong jaw darkened by stubble, and those remarkable blue eyes beneath straight brows. A small scar ran along his temple into his dark hair, which curled slightly at the collar of his shirt. "I'll need to bury the driver," he said quietly so the others wouldn't hear. "Thought it best to wait until the ladies were settled." Celeste nodded. "What's your plan for tomorrow?" "Get you all safely to Independence. After that, track those men if possible, for justice," she asked, stirring the beans she'd set to cook. A shadow crossed his face. "Let's just say I have a particular interest in men who prey on travelers." They ate a simple dinner as darkness fell. The young clerk finally spoke, revealing he was headed to Independence to work in his uncle's mercantile. The elderly man was returning home after visiting his daughter in St. Louis. The banker's wife, Mrs. Holloway, was traveling to join her husband who had established a new branch in Independence. Only Celeste kept her story to herself, volunteering merely that she was starting fresh, running from something or to something. Thomas Barrett asked later, as they stood outside beneath a vast canopy of stars. The others had retired to the cabin, leaving them alone in the cool night air. "Both, I suppose." Celeste wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Does it matter? Might. Independence is growing fast, but it's still a place where your past has a way of finding you." She smiled without humor. "My past is in St. Louis, and I doubt it has any interest in following me here." Thomas nodded, not pressing further. "You should get some rest. I'll keep watch tonight." "You don't sleep." "Not much these days." He looked toward the horizon, something distant in his gaze. "Haven't for a while now." Celeste studied his profile, wondering what ghosts kept this man awake at night. "Thank you," she said finally, "for stopping, for helping us." He turned, meeting her eyes. "Anyone would have." "No," she said firmly. "They wouldn't. Most would have ridden past or joined in the robbery themselves." A faint smile touched his lips. "You have a low opinion of mankind, Miss Adams." "Experience has been my teacher, Mr. Barrett." "Fair enough." He nodded toward the cabin. "Go on now. Morning comes early out here." Celeste hesitated, then retreated inside, finding a spot on the floor since the cots had been given to Mrs. Holloway and the elderly man. Sleep came in fitful bursts, her dreams filled with galloping horses and the echo of gunshots. Dawn broke in streaks of pink and gold across the eastern sky. Celeste awoke to the smell of coffee and the low murmur of voices outside. She smoothed her rumpled dress as best she could and joined the others around a small fire. Thomas Barrett handed her a tin cup. "Sleep well." "Well enough." She accepted the coffee gratefully. "You said I don't sleep much." His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "We should reach Independence by midday if we make good time." They set out as the sun cleared the horizon. Celeste once again took the reins of the stagecoach, with the young clerk beside her, and the driver's body secured in the back. Thomas rode ahead with Mrs. Holloway and the elderly man, his rifle across his lap, constantly scanning their surroundings. The morning passed without incident, the landscape gradually changing from rocky outcroppings to rolling hills dotted with stands of cottonwood trees. By noon, they crested a rise that revealed Independence spread below them, a bustling frontier town of wooden buildings, rutted streets, and activity. "There she is," Thomas said, reining in beside the stagecoach. Not St. Louis, but growing every day. Celeste felt a flutter of apprehension mixed with hope. "It looks busy." "Gateway to the west," he replied. "Traders, settlers, fortune-seekers all pass through here. Some stay." He glanced at her. "Will you?" "That depends on what waits for me." She gathered the reins more firmly. "Let's find out, shall we?" They drew curious stares as they entered town. The stagecoach meant to arrive yesterday, accompanied by a single rider. Thomas led them directly to the sheriff's office, a square building with a wooden star hanging beside the door. Sheriff Mills was a barrel-chested man with a salt and pepper mustache and shrewd eyes. He listened gravely as Thomas explained the situation, his gaze occasionally shifting to Celeste's bruised face. "Sounds like the Harlow gang," he said finally. "Been hitting stages between here and St. Louis for months now. Never left witnesses before, though." "They didn't intend to," Thomas replied grimly. "If I hadn't come along when I did." The sheriff nodded. "We're obliged for your intervention, Barrett. You staying in town for a spell, got business to attend to. Well, you know where to find me if you need anything." Sheriff Mills turned to the others. "I'll need statements from each of you. Then we'll see about getting you to your destinations." One by one, they recounted the robbery. When Celeste's turn came, she described the men in detail, particularly the scarred leader who had struck her. "That'd be Elias Harlow himself," the sheriff confirmed. "Mean as a rattlesnake and twice as deadly. You're lucky to be alive, Miss Adams." "Luck had little to do with it," she replied, glancing at Thomas. After they finished, the sheriff arranged for the young clerk and Mrs. Holloway to be escorted to their respective destinations. The elderly man departed on his own, claiming his home was just a few blocks away, which left Celeste standing alone on the boardwalk, her valise clutched in her hand, the address of her mother's cousin tucked in her pocket, and no money to her name. "Where are you headed?" Thomas asked, joining her outside. She hesitated. "My mother's cousin lives here, or lived here. I've not had correspondence in some months. You have the address," Celeste nodded, retrieving the folded paper. "Willow Creek Road, do you know it?" A shadow passed over Thomas's face. "I do. It's on the outskirts of town." He cleared his throat. "I can take you there if you'd like." Relief washed through her. "I would appreciate that greatly, Mr. Barrett." He offered his arm, and she took it, acutely aware of her disheveled appearance after 2 days on the trail. They walked in comfortable silence through the bustling streets of Independence, past mercantiles, saloons, a hotel, and countless shops offering everything a settler might need for the journey west. "The town has grown considerably since I was last here," Thomas remarked as they turned onto a quieter street lined with modest homes. "You've been away long, 3 years or thereabouts." His expression closed slightly. "Had some business elsewhere." Celeste sensed there was more to the story, but didn't press. Everyone had their secrets, after all. Willow Creek Road proved to be a pleasant lane on the northern edge of town, with neat houses set back from the street. Thomas stopped at the gate of a white 2-story home with green shutters and a well-tended garden. "This is the place," he said, checking the number against Celeste's paper. She smoothed her skirts nervously. "I should warn you, my cousin Martha may not be expecting me. My last letter might not have reached her." Thomas raised an eyebrow but said nothing as he opened the gate for her. They approached the front door together, and Celeste raised her hand to knock. A young woman answered, perhaps 20 years of age, with a baby on her hip. She looked at them in confusion. "May I help you?" "I'm looking for Martha Cooper," Celeste said. "She's my mother's cousin." The woman's expression fell. "Oh, I'm sorry to tell you this, but Martha passed away last winter. Influenza took her and her husband both." Celeste felt the ground shift beneath her feet. I see. I hadn't heard." "We bought the place from their son in April," the woman continued. "He moved to California after they died." "Thank you for telling me," Celeste managed, backing away from the door. "I apologize for disturbing you." The woman nodded sympathetically before closing the door. Celeste stood frozen on the path, clutching her valise, aware of Thomas Barrett watching her carefully. "You didn't know," he said. "Not a question." "No." She blinked rapidly, fighting tears. "I had nowhere else to go in St. Louis. Martha was my only remaining family." Thomas guided her gently back to the street. "Come on, let's find somewhere to sit." He led her to a small park nearby where they settled on a bench beneath a spreading oak tree. Celeste stared blindly at the ground, mind racing. No money, no family, no prospects in a town where she knew no one. "I can help you," Thomas said after a long silence. She looked up sharply. "I don't need charity, Mr. Barrett. It's not charity I'm offering." He met her gaze steadily. "I own a ranch about 10 miles outside of town. Nothing fancy, but it's good land. My housekeeper, Mrs. Figgins, has been after me to hire help for months now. You're offering me employment. As what? Whatever suits your skills. You mentioned being a seamstress. There's always mending to be done, and you clearly know your way around horses." Celeste studied him, looking for ulterior motives. "Why would you do this? You don't know me." Thomas shrugged, his eyes drifting to the distance. "Let's just say I know what it's like to arrive somewhere with nothing but hope, only to have it dashed." She considered his offer. The alternative was begging for work in a town where she had no references, possibly ending up in a saloon or worse. "I accept," she said finally. "Temporarily, until I can find my footing here." Relief flickered across his features. "Good, we can leave tomorrow. I have business in town tonight." "Where shall I stay until then?" "The boarding house on Elm Street is respectable. I'll advance you enough for a room and meals." She wanted to refuse but swallowed her pride. "I will repay every cent, Mr. Barrett." A smile touched his lips. "I have no doubt of that, Miss Adams." He escorted her to Mrs. Whittaker's boarding house, a tidy establishment with lace curtains and the scent of fresh bread wafting from the kitchen. After ensuring she was settled, Thomas promised to return in the morning. "Thank you," Celeste said as he turned to leave. "For everything." He tipped his hat, those blue eyes meeting hers briefly. "Get some rest, Miss Adams. Tomorrow's a new beginning." Alone in the small but clean room, Celeste finally allowed the tears to come for Martha, for her stolen savings, for the humiliation of accepting charity from a stranger. But beneath the despair lay a tiny spark of hope. Perhaps independence would live up to its name after all. Morning brought clear skies and renewed determination. Celeste used the basin of water provided to wash thoroughly, then donned her least wrinkled dress, a practical navy blue with white piping. Mrs. Whittaker had kindly pressed it overnight, along with providing a simple breakfast of eggs and biscuits. Thomas arrived as promised, driving a wagon loaded with supplies. He'd shaved and changed his clothes, looking every inch the prosperous rancher in a clean shirt and vest. "Ready?" he asked as he helped her into the wagon. "As I'll ever be," she replied, securing her valise beneath the seat. The journey to the Barrett ranch took them through rolling hills covered in prairie grass, occasional stands of trees marking the path of creeks and springs. Thomas pointed out landmarks as they traveled, gradually painting a picture of the region. "Most of this was open range until about 10 years ago," he explained. "Then folks started fencing and claiming land. Some of the old-timers didn't take kindly to it." "Is that what brought you here? Ranching?" He nodded, eyes on the trail. "My father was a drover. Spent his life moving other men's cattle. Always promised himself he'd have his own spread someday. Never got the chance." "So you fulfilled his dream instead?" Thomas glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Tried to, getting there slowly." They crested a hill and Thomas reined in the horses. "There it is, Barrett Ranch." Below them stretched a valley cradled by gentle slopes. A creek wound through its center, bordered by cottonwoods and willows. Near the trees stood a substantial log house with a stone chimney, a barn and several outbuildings. Fenced pastures held horses and cattle, and in the distance, a rider moved along the perimeter. "It's beautiful," Celeste said sincerely. Pride warmed Thomas's voice. 3 years of hard work. Still a lot to do, but it's coming along. They continued down the slope, the wagon rattling over the uneven ground. As they approached the house, a stout woman emerged onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "About time you got back," she called out, her tone scolding but affectionate. "Been gone 2 days longer than you said." "Ran into some trouble, Mrs. Figgins," Thomas replied as he brought the wagon to a halt. "Also brought you the help you've been badgering me about." Mrs. Figgins's sharp eyes assessed Celeste immediately. "Well, it's about time. This place needs a woman's touch beyond what these old hands can provide." Celeste climbed down from the wagon, extending her hand. "Celeste Adams, madam. I'm grateful for the opportunity. Margaret Figgins. Been keeping house for Mr. Barrett since he bought this place." She took Celeste's hand briefly. "Come inside. You look like you could use a proper meal and a bath." The interior of the house surprised Celeste. Though rustic, it was well built, with polished wood floors, comfortable furniture, and a large stone fireplace dominating the main room. Windows let in ample light, and someone, presumably Mrs. Figgins, had placed wildflowers in a jar on the dining table. "It's lovely," she said. "It's getting there," Mrs. Figgins replied. "Mr. Barrett has good taste but little time for the finer details. That's where you'll come in, I expect." Celeste glanced at Thomas, who had followed them inside. "I'm not entirely sure what my duties will entail." He cleared his throat. "Mrs. Figgins handles the cooking and basic housekeeping, but there's mending, laundry, gardening, helping with preserving when harvest comes. Whatever needs doing. And Lord knows there's plenty," Mrs. Figgins added. "6 ranch hands to feed and clothe, not counting the boss." Thomas set Celeste's valise by the stairs. "I'll show you to your room, then I need to check on things with the men." Her quarters proved to be a pleasant corner room on the 2nd floor, with windows facing east and south. A narrow bed, dresser, washstand, and rocking chair constituted the furnishings, simple but well crafted. "It's not fancy," Thomas said, lingering in the doorway, "but it's private. The men's bunkhouse is separate from the main house." "It's more than adequate, Mr. Barrett. Thank you," he nodded, hesitating as if wanting to say more, then thought better of it. "Mrs. Figgins will show you around. We eat supper at 6. Left alone, Celeste unpacked her meager belongings, arranging them carefully in the dresser drawers. The room felt alien yet somehow welcoming, the clean linens and swept floor evidence of Mrs. Figgins's careful stewardship. A soft knock announced the housekeeper's return. "Bath's ready downstairs if you want it. Got some stew on for lunch after." "Thank you, Mrs. Figgins. I appreciate your kindness." The older woman's stern expression softened slightly. "Been just men around here too long. Nice to have another woman about the place." She hesitated. "If you don't mind my asking, how'd you come to be in need of work? You don't seem the typical sort looking for domestic service." Celeste considered how much to share. "I was robbed on my way to independence. Lost everything I'd saved. Mr. Barrett happened to be passing by and came to our aid." Mrs. Figgins looked thoughtful. "That sounds like him. Always had a soft spot for folks in trouble." She turned to leave. "Bath's getting cold. Better hurry." The hot water proved heavenly after days of travel. Celeste scrubbed away the dust and worry, letting herself relax for the first time since the stagecoach robbery. By the time she emerged, dressed again in her blue dress with her damp hair pinned up, she felt almost human. Mrs. Figgins served a hearty stew with fresh bread, chatting about the ranch and its routines. Thomas didn't return for the meal, but the housekeeper seemed unsurprised. "Often eats with the men when there's work to be done," she explained. "Spring calving's just finished, but there's always something needing attention." After lunch, Mrs. Figgins gave her a tour of the house, pointing out the workroom where mending and sewing were done, the pantry stocked with preserved goods, and the kitchen with its massive cast iron stove. "Garden's out back," she said, leading Celeste outside. Got vegetables and herbs mostly. The boss wants to plant fruit trees next year. A neat plot stretched behind the house, rows of young plants just beginning to flourish. Beyond it lay a chicken coop, smokehouse, and root cellar. It's quite an operation, Celeste observed. Mrs. Figgins nodded, pride evident in her bearing. He's built something good here. Not many would have managed it in just 3 years. The afternoon passed quickly as Celeste familiarized herself with the household. Mrs. Figgins set her to mending some shirts, seeming satisfied with her neat stitches. "Where did you learn to sew like that?" she asked. "I was a seamstress in St. Louis," Celeste replied, carefully repairing a torn sleeve. "Before that, my mother taught me. Good skills to have out here." Factory-made clothing's available in town, but most folks still rely on homemade or mended. As evening approached, the house came alive with activity. Ranch hands washed up at the pump outside before filing into the dining room 5 men of varying ages, all nodding respectfully to Celeste when Mrs. Figgins introduced her. Thomas entered last, dust clinging to his clothes, fatigue evident in the set of his shoulders. His eyes found Celeste immediately, a question in them that she couldn't quite interpret. "Miss Adams," he acknowledged. "Settling in?" "Yes, thank you, Mrs. Figgins has been most helpful." Dinner proved to be a lively affair, the men sharing stories and good-natured ribbing across the long table. Celeste observed Thomas with his crew, noting how they deferred to him without fear, respect, rather than intimidation guiding their interactions. When the meal concluded, the hands retreated to their bunkhouse while Thomas lingered, helping Mrs. Figgins clear the table despite her protests. "Not necessary, Mr. Barrett. That's why you hired Miss Adams. She can start her duties properly tomorrow," he replied. "Tonight she's still a guest." Later, as twilight deepened, Celeste found herself drawn to the front porch. The air had cooled, bringing with it the scent of grass and distant rain. She sat on the steps, watching as stars emerged in the darkening sky, so much brighter here than in the city. "May I join you?" She turned to find Thomas standing in the doorway, a cup of coffee in each hand. He changed into a clean shirt, his hair still damp from washing. "Of course, it's your porch." He smiled faintly, handing her one of the cups before settling beside her. "Technically, yes. But I've found ownership is a complicated thing out here." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping the strong coffee and listening to the night sounds: crickets, the occasional whinny from the corral, the distant cry of a coyote. "Thank you," Celeste said finally, "for taking me in." "Not many would have." Thomas studied the darkness. "I told you I understand what it's like to start over with nothing." "Is that what happened to you? Before the ranch?" He was quiet so long she thought he might not answer. "Something like that. Lost everything that mattered in one day. Had to decide whether to lie down and die or stand up and build something new." "What made you choose the latter?" His blue eyes reflected the starlight when he turned to her. "Stubbornness, maybe, or spite." His mouth quirked. "Wasn't ready to give whoever was keeping score the satisfaction." Celeste smiled, appreciating his candor. "Well, I'm glad you didn't. Otherwise, I'd likely be scrubbing floors in some saloon by now." "You'd have found your way," he said with surprising conviction. "Saw that the moment you took those reins after the robbery. You're not the type to be defeated easily." Heat rose in her cheeks at the unexpected compliment. "I've had practice at starting over." Thomas nodded, not pressing for details she wasn't ready to give. Instead, he pointed to the stars overhead. "Different view from the city, isn't it?" "Completely. I'd forgotten how bright they could be." "That's one thing I love about this place. Reminds you how small your troubles are in the grand scheme." Celeste considered this. "Does it help with whatever ghosts keep you from sleeping?" He glanced at her sharply, then his expression softened. Sometimes, not always. He set his empty cup aside. What about you, Miss Adams? What ghosts brought you west? The usual kind, I suppose. Betrayal, humiliation, the desperate need for somewhere people don't know your name or your mistakes. Fair enough. He stood, offering her his hand. It's getting late. Mrs. Figgins starts early. Celeste allowed him to help her up, acutely aware of his calloused palm against hers, the strength in his fingers. Good night, Mr. Barrett. Good night, Miss Adams. He hesitated. For what it's worth, I think independence might be exactly what you need. In her room, Celeste stood at the window, gazing out at the moonlit landscape. For the first time since leaving St. Louis, she felt a tentative hope unfurling within her, fragile as a new leaf, but undeniably present. Days at the Barrett ranch fell into a rhythm. Celeste rose with the sun, helping Mrs. Figgins prepare breakfast for the hands, before turning to her own duties: mending, laundry, tending the garden. She proved adept at stretching provisions and finding creative uses for leftovers, skills honed during lean times in St. Louis. Thomas was often absent during daylight hours, riding out with his men to check fences, move cattle, or handle the countless tasks required to keep the ranch functioning. But he made a point to return for supper most evenings, occasionally joining Celeste on the porch afterward for conversation beneath the stars. 2 weeks after her arrival, she was hanging laundry in the yard when the sound of approaching riders drew her attention. Thomas and 2 of his hands were returning early, unusual for mid-afternoon. Trouble? Mrs. Figgins asked, emerging from the kitchen. Maybe, Celeste replied, noting the tension in Thomas's posture as he dismounted. He strode toward the house, removing his hat as he approached. Mrs. Figgins, we're expecting company. Sheriff Mills is riding out with news. The housekeeper nodded grimly. I'll put coffee on. Thomas's eyes found Celeste. Miss Adams, might I have a word? She followed him to the side of the house, out of earshot of the hands who were unsaddling the horses nearby. The Harlow gang was spotted near Willow Creek yesterday, he said without preamble. Sheriff thinks they might be planning another robbery. Celeste felt her heart quicken. The men who attacked my stagecoach, the same. His expression hardened. Mills is gathering a posse, wants me to join. And you will. It wasn't a question. Thomas studied her face. You disapprove? No. She twisted her apron between her fingers. I understand the necessity, I just worry about the danger. Something softened in his eyes. I can handle myself, Miss Adams. I'm sure you can, Mr. Barrett, but 3 against 1 are poor odds even for you. She echoed his words from their first meeting with a faint smile. He matched it with one of his own. It won't be one this time. That's why Mills is forming a posse. Celeste nodded, trying to mask her concern. When will you leave? Tomorrow at first light. Should be gone 3 days, maybe 4. I'll pack provisions for your saddlebags. Thomas reached out, briefly touching her arm. Thank you for understanding. The sheriff arrived an hour later, a weathered man with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He greeted Celeste with a nod of recognition. Miss Adams, recovered from your ordeal, I see. Yes, Sheriff. Mr. Barrett has been most generous. Mills raised an eyebrow at that but made no comment as they moved into the house. Celeste served coffee while the men discussed strategy at the dining table, maps spread between them. Harlow's got a hideout somewhere in these hills, Mills said, tracing a region with his finger. Local rancher spotted them heading this direction day before yesterday, 3 men matching their description. They're getting bold, Thomas observed, operating this close to town. Too bold. Last month they killed a mail carrier near Liberty. Month before that, a family of settlers. The sheriff's expression darkened. Time we put an end to it. Celeste moved quietly about her tasks, listening while trying to appear uninvolved. Something about the intensity in Thomas's face reminded her that there was much she still didn't know about him. That evening, after the sheriff departed, Thomas found her in the workroom, packing dried beef, hardtack, and coffee into a small sack. "You don't have to do that," he said from the doorway. "I know." She continued her task. "I want to be useful." He stepped into the room, closing the distance between them. "You are more than you know." Celeste looked up, startled by his nearness and the earnestness in his voice. "The ranch feels different with you here," he continued, his voice low. "Better." Heat rose in her cheeks. "Mrs. Figgins would say that's just because someone's finally mending your shirts properly." A smile tugged at his mouth. "It's more than that," he hesitated. "When I get back, there's something I'd like to discuss with you about your position here." Alarm flickered through her. "Have I been unsatisfactory?" "No." He shook his head quickly. "The opposite, in fact, but it can wait until I return." Celeste nodded, uncertain what to make of his words or the intensity of his gaze. "Be careful, Mr. Barrett. The Harlows don't strike me as men who surrender easily." "I will." He turned to leave, then paused. "And Celeste, it's Thomas. After a month of sharing meals, I think we can dispense with formalities." The sound of her name on his lips sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Thomas, then. Godspeed tomorrow." Dawn came too quickly. Celeste rose before the sun, preparing breakfast for Thomas and the two hands who would accompany him, Jacob. A seasoned cowboy with graying temples, Emily, barely 20, but skilled with horses and tracking. Thomas appeared in the kitchen as she was filling a thermos with coffee, his gun belt already buckled over his denim pants, a bandana tied loosely around his neck. "You're up early," he observed. "Wanted to make sure you had a proper meal before you left." She gestured to the table where plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits waited. He studied her for a moment. "Thank you." They ate mostly in silence, the gravity of the day's mission hanging over the table. When it was time to leave, Thomas lingered in the doorway, hat in hand. 3 days, he reminded her. 4 at most. Celeste nodded, fighting the irrational fear that threatened to close her throat. "We'll be here." He hesitated, then stepped forward, pressing something cold and heavy into her palm. "Just in case." She looked down to find a revolver in her hand, small but well-maintained. "Thomas, do you know how to use it?" "Yes." Her father had insisted all his daughters learn, unusual though it was. "But I don't think just precaution," he interrupted gently. "Probably unnecessary, but it would ease my mind to know you have it." The significance of his concern wasn't lost on her. Celeste curled her fingers around the weapon, nodding. "Be safe." She watched from the porch as the 3 men rode away, Thomas's broad shoulders straight in the saddle, his hat silhouetted against the rising sun. Only when they disappeared over the ridge did she allow herself to acknowledge the depth of her worry and what it might mean. The first 2 days passed slowly, each hour stretching longer than the last. Celeste threw herself into her work, tackling projects she'd been putting off, reorganizing the pantry, deep cleaning the parlor, even helping Mrs. Figgins wash the windows until they gleamed in the summer sun. "You're wearing yourself out," the housekeeper observed on the evening of the second day. "He'll come back when he comes back. Fretting won't change it." Celeste looked up from the shirt she was mending, startled by the older woman's perception. "I'm not fretting, just keeping busy." Mrs. Figgins snorted softly. "If you say so." She settled in her rocking chair by the fire. "Known Thomas Barrett 3 years now, never seen him give his personal revolver to anyone before." Heat crept up Celeste's neck. "It's just a precaution. Hum." The housekeeper picked up her knitting. "Man doesn't part with his backup weapon for just anyone. Not out here." Celeste didn't respond, unsure what to make of the implication. Yes, she'd grown to admire Thomas, his quiet strength, his fairness with his men, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. But after James, she'd sworn never to trust her heart to another man. The third day dawned overcast, dark clouds gathering on the horizon. By noon, thunder rumbled in the distance, promising a summer storm. Celeste helped Mrs. Figgins bring in the laundry from the line, both women casting frequent glances toward the ridge where Thomas and his men would appear upon their return. Rain began to fall as evening approached, gentle at first, then increasing to a steady downpour that drummed against the roof and windows. The remaining ranch hands huddled in the bunkhouse, while Celeste and Mrs. Figgins kept a pot of stew warm on the stove, ready for the returning men. Storm might delay them, Mrs. Figgins said as they sat at the kitchen table, cups of tea growing cold before them. Thomas knows better than to cross the creek when it's running high. Celeste nodded, trying to ignore the knot of worry in her stomach. Of course, he's sensible. Mrs. Figgins patted her hand. Best get some rest, dear. Nothing to be done tonight except wait. But sleep proved elusive. Celeste lay awake in her bed, listening to the rain and the occasional rumble of thunder, Thomas's revolver on the nightstand beside her. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind had her sitting up, straining to hear hoofbeats beneath the storm. Dawn broke gray and misty, the rain reduced to a gentle patter against the windows. Celeste dressed quickly and descended to the kitchen, finding Mrs. Figgins already at the stove. "Any sign?" she asked, though she knew the answer. The housekeeper shook her head. "Creek will be high today. Might have to wait for it to recede." Celeste nodded, trying to focus on practical concerns rather than the growing fear that something had gone wrong. She busied herself with breakfast preparations, setting the table for the remaining hands. The day crawled by, each hour heavier than the last. By mid-afternoon, the rain had stopped entirely, leaving the world washed clean and glistening. Celeste stood on the porch, scanning the horizon, willing Thomas to appear. "Miss Adams." She turned to find one of the ranch hands, Davis, the youngest, running toward the house from the western pasture, waving frantically. "Riders coming," he called. "But something's wrong." Celeste's heart lurched as she shaded her eyes, following his pointing finger. 3 figures on horseback were indeed approaching, but one appeared to be slumped forward in the saddle, supported by another rider alongside. "Mrs. Figgins," she shouted, already running toward the gate. "Prepare hot water and bandages." She raced across the muddy yard, heedless of her skirts dragging through puddles. As the riders drew closer, she could make out Jacob and Ellie flanking Thomas, whose shirt was stained dark across one shoulder. "What happened?" she demanded as they reached the yard. "Ambush," Jacob answered grimly, dismounting quickly. "Got the drop on us near Eagle Canyon. Boss took a bullet, but we got away clean." Ellie helped ease Thomas from his saddle. Despite his obvious pain, he remained conscious, his face pale beneath several days' growth of beard. "Told them." "Not to worry you," he managed as they supported him toward the house. "Quiet," Celeste ordered, her fear transforming into purposeful energy. "Save your strength." Mrs. Figgins had already prepared the kitchen table, clearing it and covering it with clean cloths. "Get his shirt off," she directed as they brought Thomas inside. "Need to see how bad it is." Together they eased him onto the table, Celeste carefully cutting away his blood-soaked shirt while Mrs. Figgins boiled instruments. The wound revealed itself an ugly tear through the meat of his left shoulder, the bullet having passed clean through. "Could have been worse," Mrs. Figgins declared after examination. "Missed the bone, looks like. Bleeding's mostly stopped." Thomas's eyes found Celeste's, pain evident in their blue depths. "Sorry to cause trouble." "Hush," she said, squeezing his good hand. "Trouble seems to follow you whether I'm involved or not. A ghost of a smile touched his lips before he winced as Mrs. Figgins began cleaning the wound. "What about the Harlows?" Celeste asked Jacob, who hovered nearby. "Sheriff got one of them, the youngest brother. Elias and the other one escaped into the hills." His expression darkened. "Not before Elias put a bullet in Mr. Barrett, though." Celeste nodded, processing this information as she assisted Mrs. Figgins. The thought of Elias Harlow still at large sent a chill through her, but her immediate concern was the man before her. It took an hour to properly clean, disinfect, and bandage Thomas's wound. By the end, he was pale from pain but still conscious, his jaw clenched to prevent any sound escaping. "Need to get him to bed," Mrs. Figgins said when they'd finished. "Jacob, Ali, can you manage?" The men nodded, carefully helping Thomas to his feet and supporting him up the stairs to his bedroom. Celeste followed, carrying fresh water and additional bandages. Once he was settled, Mrs. Figgins shooed the men out. "I'll prepare a tonic for the pain," she told Celeste. "You stay with him. Any sign of fever, call me immediately." Left alone with Thomas, Celeste pulled a chair to his bedside and dampened a cloth to wipe his brow. His eyes opened at her touch, focusing on her with effort. "The men," he began. "They're fine. Everyone's safe." She adjusted his pillow. "You should rest, Sheriff Mills." "Returned to town with the body of the younger Harlow, according to Jacob." Thomas nodded slightly, wincing at the movement. "Need to warn you," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Elias knows." Celeste frowned. "Knows what about you? Here." His fingers found hers, gripping with surprising strength. "He recognized my name. Said he'd finish what he started with the pretty lady from the stagecoach." Cold fear washed through her. "How would he know I'm here? Town gossips." Thomas's expression was grim. "Independence isn't that big. People talk about the rancher who brought home a city woman." The implication settled heavily between them. Celeste straightened her shoulders, refusing to show her fear. "Well, let him come. He'll find we're not easy targets." A smile ghosted across Thomas's pale features. "That's what I told him right before I put a bullet in his leg." Despite everything, Celeste found herself laughing, a release of tension that bordered on hysteria. "You're impossible, so I've been told." His eyes grew serious again. "I've put you in danger, I'm sorry." "You saved my life," she countered. "Twice now." "I think that balances the scales." Mrs. Figgins returned with a steaming cup. "Willow bark and a touch of laudanum," she explained. "Will help with the pain and let him sleep." Together they helped Thomas drink, his grimace suggesting the bitter taste nearly overcame the agony in his shoulder. When the cup was empty, Celeste eased him back against the pillows. "Rest now," she said softly. "I'll stay nearby." His eyes were already growing heavy, the medicine taking effect. "Celeste," he murmured, "be careful." "I will." She squeezed his hand. "Sleep, Thomas." He drifted off, features gradually relaxing as pain released its grip. Celeste remained in the chair, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, the revolver he'd given her now tucked in the pocket of her apron. "I'll sit with him a while," Mrs. Figgins said from the doorway. "You should eat something, then check that the men have secured the property." Celeste nodded, reluctantly leaving Thomas's side. Downstairs, she found Jacob and the other hands gathered around the kitchen table, their expressions somber. "Boss is resting," she told them. "But we may have another problem. Thomas believes Elias Harlow might come looking for revenge." Jacob straightened. "We'll double the watch tonight. No one gets near the house without us knowing." Celeste nodded gratefully. "Thank you." As darkness fell, the ranch battened down like a ship preparing for a storm. Lanterns were dimmed, doors and windows secured. 2 men took positions outside, rifles ready, while the others rested but remained clothed and armed. Celeste returned to Thomas's room, finding Mrs. Figgins dozing in the chair, she gently woke the older woman. "Go rest properly," she whispered. "I'll watch him now." Mrs. Figgins studied her face, then nodded. "Call if his fever rises, or if—" She glanced meaningfully toward the window. "I will." Alone again with Thomas, Celeste settled in the chair, the revolver now on her lap. Outside, a half-moon provided just enough light to cast shadows across the yard. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of the house settling had her tensing, straining to distinguish normal night sounds from potential danger. Thomas stirred in his sleep, murmuring something indistinct. Celeste leaned forward, placing a cool hand on his forehead. Warm, but not alarmingly so. She refreshed the cloth and gently wiped his brow, studying his features in repose. The strong line of his jaw now softened in sleep. The dark lashes against his cheeks, the slight furrow between his brows that never fully disappeared, even in unconsciousness. When had this man become so important to her? When had his safety started to matter more than her own? The questions circled in her mind as the night deepened. Outside, clouds occasionally obscured the moon, plunging the landscape into darkness before revealing it again in silvery light. Sometime past midnight, Thomas's eyes opened, clear and alert despite the medication. "You're still here," he said, voice rough with sleep. "I said I would be." She offered him water, which he accepted gratefully. "How's the pain? Manageable?" He glanced toward the window. "Any trouble?" "None." "The men are keeping watch," he nodded, eyes moving to the revolver in her lap. "Good, but I'd feel better if you weren't alone." "I'm not alone," she said simply. "You're here." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "Celeste, if anything happened to you because of me, nothing will happen," she interrupted firmly. "And if it does, it won't be because of you. It would be because of Elias Harlow and his kind men who prey on others, because they're too weak or too lazy to build something legitimate for themselves." Thomas studied her face in the dim light. "You've changed since you arrived." "Have I? MMM." He shifted slightly, wincing at the movement. "When I found you on that stagecoach, you were wounded not just physically, like something inside had been broken." Celeste looked away, uncomfortable with his perception. "Many would say I still am." "No." His good hand found hers, warm and solid. "Whatever was broken has mended, different maybe, stronger in the broken places." The tenderness in his voice nearly undid her. She blinked rapidly, fighting unexpected tears. "You should rest." "I will." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "But first, tell me something." "What?" "What happened in St. Louis? What drove you west?" Celeste hesitated, the old shame rising like bile in her throat. But looking at Thomas, this man who had saved her, trusted her, brought her into his home, she found herself wanting him to know. "I was engaged," she began slowly, "to a man named James Whitcomb, son of a prominent family, charming, well-connected." She swallowed hard. "Everything was arranged: the church, my dress, the reception. 200 guests invited." Thomas waited, his hand still holding hers. "The morning of the wedding, my maid of honor came to help me dress. Emily had been my friend since childhood." A bitter smile crossed Celeste's face. "She was distraught, crying. Said she couldn't stand by and watch me marry James without knowing the truth." "What truth?" Thomas asked quietly. "That she and James had been lovers for months, that he'd promised to leave me for her, then lost his nerve. That he was only marrying me for my family's connections." Celeste's voice remained steady despite the ache of old wounds. "I confronted him. He denied it at first, then admitted everything when I showed him Emily's letters." Thomas's grip tightened on her hand. "What did you do?" "What could I do?" "I canceled the wedding, but it was too late to stop the gossip. Everyone knew. James spread rumors that I'd been improper with another man, that he'd called off the wedding, not me." She shook her head. In society's eyes, I was ruined, so you left. Not immediately. I tried to weather it. Found work as a seamstress, kept to myself. But St. Louis isn't that large, not really. I saw James and Emily everywhere at church, in shops, at the park. Celeste met his gaze directly. The final straw was learning they were expecting a child, the happiness that should have been mine. "I'm sorry," Thomas said softly. "Don't be. If not for James's betrayal, I wouldn't be here now." She smiled faintly. Perhaps it was a blessing in disguise. Thomas studied her face in the moonlight. "You know what they said about you in town after you arrived?" Celeste tensed. "No." "That Barrett was a fool to take in a city woman with a mysterious past." His mouth curved. "That you'd leave as soon as something better came along. And what did you say to that?" "Nothing." His blue eyes held hers. "I let them talk. People always do." She nodded, understanding. "They called me a fool, too, for trusting James, for believing in love." Were they right? The question hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond the simple words. Celeste considered it carefully, thinking of how she'd felt watching Thomas ride away, the fear that had gripped her when he returned wounded. "Perhaps," she admitted. "But I'm beginning to think some things are worth the risk of being foolish." Something kindled in his eyes, hope, perhaps, or understanding. "Then we're both fools together." The words landed like a physical touch, warm and promising. Before she could respond, a sharp crack split the night, unmistakably a rifle shot from somewhere near the barn. Thomas was immediately alert, pushing himself upright despite his injury. "Stay here," he ordered, reaching for his gun belt hanging on the bedpost. "You can't," Celeste protested, pressing him back. "You'll reopen your wound." Another shot rang out, followed by shouting. Thomas ignored her, swinging his legs over the side of the bed, his face pale with pain but determined. "Thomas, please, get Mrs. Figgins," he said through gritted teeth. "Tell her to bring my spare rifle from the cabinet in my study." Recognizing the futility of arguing, Celeste hurried to wake the housekeeper, who appeared moments later in a flannel nightgown, rifle in hand. "Foolish man," she muttered, following Celeste back to Thomas's room. "Going to undo all our good work." They found him standing at the window, peering into the darkness, one arm held tight against his bandaged shoulder. More shouts came from the yard, then the distinctive sound of horses galloping away. "Jacob's calling the all clear," Thomas said, relief evident in his voice. "They're retreating." Mrs. Figgins thrust the rifle at him. "If you're determined to get yourself killed, at least have proper firepower." A commotion downstairs announced the arrival of the ranch hands. Celeste hurried to meet them, finding Jacob and Davis in the kitchen, expressions grim. "Two riders," Jacob reported, "got as far as the barn before we spotted them. Exchanged fire, then they fled north. Anyone hurt?" she asked. Ellie took a graze to the arm, nothing serious. Jacob's weathered face creased with concern. "How's the boss, stubborn Mrs.?" Figgins answered, descending the stairs, refusing to stay in bed despite having a hole in his shoulder. As if summoned by her words, Thomas appeared at the top of the stairs, shirt hastily buttoned over his bandages, face gray with pain but resolute. "Jacob," he called. "Send Davis to town at first light. Tell Sheriff Mills what happened." "Already planned to, boss." Thomas nodded, gripping the banister as he made his careful way down. Celeste hurried to his side, offering her shoulder for support. "You shouldn't be up," she murmured. "Had to make sure everyone was safe," he replied, his breath warm against her hair. They moved together to the kitchen, where Mrs. Figgins was already brewing coffee. No one would sleep more tonight, that much was understood without saying. "Think it was the Harlows?" Davis asked, accepting a steaming cup. "Who else?" Jacob replied. "Question is, will they try again?" Thomas eased into a chair, grimacing. "Not tonight, but they'll be back." "We'll be ready," Celeste said firmly, taking the seat beside him. As dawn approached, the tension gradually eased. Davis departed for town with a message for Sheriff Mills, while the other hands returned to their posts, more alert than ever. Thomas, despite protests from both Celeste and Mrs. Figgins, refused to return to bed. "If I'm going to die, it won't be lying down," he declared, though the stubborn set of his jaw couldn't quite hide his exhaustion. Mid-morning brought Sheriff Mills and a deputy, their horses lathered from hard riding. Celeste met them at the door, ushering them into the parlor where Thomas sat in an armchair, his wounded arm supported by a sling Mrs. Figgins had fashioned. "You look terrible, Barrett," Mills said by way of greeting. "Been better," Thomas admitted. "Any sign of the Harlows?" "None since our encounter in the hills." The sheriff accepted coffee from Celeste with a nod of thanks. "But I'm not surprised they came here. Elias has always been vindictive." "It's me they want," Celeste said quietly, "because I can identify them from the stagecoach robbery." Mills studied her thoughtfully. "Partly, but mostly it's about pride now. Barrett shot Elias, made him run. That's not something a man like Harlow forgives." "So what do we do?" Thomas asked, his hand finding Celeste's where she stood beside his chair. The sheriff's sharp eyes noted the gesture but made no comment. "We could try to wait them out. Postmen here hope they show themselves." "Or," Thomas pressed, "or we draw them out, on our terms." Celeste felt Thomas's grip tighten on her hand. "How?" Mills leaned forward. "Word around town is that Barrett's getting married. To the pretty lady he rescued from the stagecoach robbery." Celeste stiffened. "I don't understand." "Weddings mean travel, predictable movements, vulnerability." The sheriff's expression was serious. "We announce the wedding is taking place in town next Sunday. Make sure everyone knows. The Harlows will see it as their chance." "Absolutely not," Thomas said flatly. "Using Celeste as bait is out of the question." "It wouldn't just be Miss Adams," Mills countered. "You'd both be the targets." "But we'd control the situation. Have men positioned throughout town." "Too risky," Thomas insisted. "There must be another way." Celeste remained silent, processing the sheriff's suggestion. It was madness, of course, pretending to be engaged, staging a wedding as a trap. Yet something about it made a certain sense. The Harlows were growing desperate. They needed to end this before someone else got hurt. "I'll do it," she said finally. Both men turned to her in surprise. "Celeste, no," Thomas began. "It's the logical solution," she continued, meeting his gaze steadily. "We can't live under siege forever. Your men can't stay vigilant indefinitely. Someone will make a mistake, get hurt, or worse." "She has a point, Barrett," the sheriff said, "and we'll take every precaution. My deputy and I, plus any men you trust from the ranch." Thomas's expression was thunderous. "There has to be another way." "Is there?" Celeste challenged gently. "Tell me honestly." He held her gaze for a long moment before his shoulders slumped slightly. "I don't like it." "Neither do I," she admitted. "But I like the alternatives even less." The plan took shape over the next several days. Word was deliberately spread throughout Independence that Thomas Barrett was to wed Miss Celeste Adams on Sunday at the town's small church. Mrs. Figgins, though initially skeptical, threw herself into the preparations with surprising enthusiasm, altering one of Celeste's dresses to serve as a wedding gown. "Just because it's not real doesn't mean you shouldn't look proper," she insisted, pinning lace to the neckline. Thomas's wound began to heal, though he remained pale and moved carefully to avoid reopening it. Each night, he and Celeste sat on the porch, discussing the plan, identifying potential weaknesses, and sometimes simply enjoying each other's company in the quiet evening hours. "Are you afraid?" he asked the night before they were to depart for town. Celeste considered the question. "Yes," she admitted, but not as much as I should be." "Why not?" She turned to him, moonlight silvering his features. "Because I trust you and the sheriff. And because I'm tired of running from men like Elias Harlow." Thomas studied her face. "You're remarkable, you know that." Heat bloomed in her cheeks. "Hardly, just practical." "No." He shifted closer, his good hand finding hers. "It's more than that. When I found you on that stagecoach, something told me you were different, special." Celeste's heart quickened. "Thomas, let me finish." His fingers laced through hers. "I know this wedding is a ruse, a trap for the Harlows, but I need you to know my feelings for you are real." The confession hung between them, both terrifying and exhilarating. Celeste searched his face, finding only sincerity in his blue eyes. "How can you be sure?" she whispered. "After everything I told you about James, about my past. Because I know who you are now. Here." His hand tightened on hers. The woman who took the reins when others would have faltered, who rebuilt her life from nothing, who faces danger with courage rather than fear. Tears pricked at her eyes. "They called me a fool for trusting again." Thomas smiled gently. "Then we're both fools together." He leaned forward, his lips finding hers in a kiss as soft as a whisper yet filled with promise. Celeste's hand rose to his cheek, feeling the roughness of stubble beneath her palm as she returned the kiss, something long dormant awakening within her. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his. "If we survive tomorrow," she said softly, "perhaps we should discuss making this wedding less of a pretense." His smile was like sunrise breaking across his features. "I'd like that very much, Celeste Adams." Sunday dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect late summer day that seemed made for celebrations. Celeste dressed with Mrs. Figgins's help, her hands trembling slightly as she fastened the buttons of her altered blue dress, now adorned with delicate lace and tiny pearl buttons salvaged from the housekeeper's sewing box. "You look lovely," Mrs. Figgins declared, stepping back to admire her work. "Shame about the circumstances." Celeste smiled tightly. "Indeed." They departed for town in 2 wagons, Celeste with Mrs. Figgins and 2 ranch hands in one, Thomas with Jacob and Ellie in the other. Sheriff Mills had arranged for deputies to be positioned throughout Independence, with particular focus on the church and the main road leading into town. As they approached Independence, Celeste's apprehension grew. Somewhere among these buildings, these crowded streets, Elias Harlow and his remaining brother were waiting, planning, preparing to strike. The church stood on a quiet corner, its white steeple rising above neighboring buildings. A small crowd had gathered outside, curious townsfolk drawn by the gossip of Barrett's hasty wedding to the mysterious Eastern woman. Perfect cover for outlaws seeking to blend in. Thomas helped Celeste down from the wagon, his eyes scanning the crowd ceaselessly. "Stay close," he murmured, offering his arm. "Always," she replied, accepting it. They moved toward the church steps, nodding to acquaintances and strangers alike. Sheriff Mills stood near the entrance, his casual posture belied by the alert sharpness in his eyes. He gave them an imperceptible nod as they passed. Inside, the church was cool and dim, sunlight filtering through simple stained glass windows to cast colorful patterns across the wooden pews. The minister who had been informed of the plan waited at the altar, Bible in hand, playing his role convincingly. As planned, Celeste took her place at the back of the church, ostensibly waiting for the ceremony to begin while the guests filed in. Thomas moved to the front, conferring quietly with the minister. Their staging was deliberate, separated. They presented 2 targets instead of 1, forcing the Harlows to choose or divide their forces. The minutes stretched interminably as the church filled. Celeste's eyes constantly moved, searching for unfamiliar faces, for the scarred man who had struck her that day on the stagecoach. Her hand rested in the pocket of her dress. Fingers wrapped around the small derringer Thomas had insisted she carry. The organist began to play the signal that all deputies were in position. Celeste took a deep breath and began her slow walk down the aisle, every sense heightened, aware of Thomas watching her from the altar, his expression a mixture of admiration and concern. She was halfway to the altar when a commotion erupted at the back of the church. A man shoved his way inside, gun already drawn, not Elias, but his brother, wild-eyed and desperate. "Barrett," he shouted, raising his revolver. Everything happened at once. Thomas lunged toward Celeste as shots rang out from multiple directions. She dropped to the floor as instructed, rolling beneath a pew as chaos erupted around her. Women screamed, men shouted, more gunfire echoed against the church walls. Through the confusion, Celeste caught glimpses of movement. Sheriff Mills advancing down the side aisle, deputies converging from hidden positions. Thomas had drawn his own weapon, firing from behind the cover of the altar. Then, amid the chaos, a hand grabbed her ankle, dragging her from beneath the pew. Celeste looked up into the scarred face of Elias Harlow, his eyes blazing with hatred. "Hello, pretty lady," he snarled, hauling her to her feet. "Remember me." Celeste's hand closed around the derringer in her pocket. "How could I forget?" With a swift movement, she pulled the gun free and fired directly into his side. Elias howled in pain, his grip loosening enough for her to break away. She stumbled backward, colliding with a pew as Elias raised his own gun, his face contorted in rage. A shot rang out, but not from Elias. He stood frozen for a moment, a look of surprise crossing his features before he crumpled to the floor. Behind him stood Thomas, his smoking revolver still extended. "Celeste," he called, rushing to her side. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, trembling with reaction. "No, I'm fine." He pulled her against him, his arm tight around her waist. "It's over." Around them, the shooting had stopped. Sheriff Mills stood over the body of the younger Harlow, while deputies secured the church doors to prevent anyone else from entering or leaving. "Both dead," Mills confirmed, approaching them. "Clean shot, Barrett." Thomas nodded grimly, his attention focused on Celeste. "You're sure you're not injured? Just shaken," she assured him, though her voice quavered slightly. The minister emerged from where he'd taken cover behind the altar, his face pale but composed. "Perhaps," he suggested carefully, "we should conclude the ceremony, for the sake of appearances." Thomas and Celeste exchanged glances. The church was in disarray, frightened wedding guests still huddled in pews or behind pillars, not exactly the setting for romance. "Another time, Reverend," Thomas said firmly. "When it's real." The aftermath was a blur of statements to the sheriff, reassurances to concerned townsfolk, and the gradual restoration of order. By late afternoon, Celeste found herself sitting on a bench outside the church, a cup of tea someone had pressed into her hands growing cold. Thomas settled beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. "Ready to go home. Home." The word resonated through her, carrying weight and meaning she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge before. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm ready." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them processing the day's events. The setting sun painted the landscape in shades of gold and amber, the beauty a stark contrast to the violence they had witnessed. "Did you mean what you said?" Celeste asked finally. "To the Reverend. About when it's real." Thomas glanced at her, the fading light catching the blue of his eyes. "Every word. Even after today, after seeing what trouble follows me," he smiled slightly. "Trouble followed me long before you arrived, Celeste, and it will probably find us again. That's the nature of life out here." She nodded, understanding the truth in his words. So where does that leave us? The wagon crested the hill that overlooked the Barrett ranch, the buildings below bathed in sunset's glow. Thomas reined in the horses, taking a moment to gaze at his home, their home. It leaves us here, he said simply. Together. Building something worth fighting for. He turned to her, his expression open and unguarded. I love you, Celeste Adams, not despite your past, but including it. Every triumph, every scar, every moment that made you who you are today. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were different from any she had shed before, tears of release, of joy, of possibility. I love you too, she whispered, and I'm no longer afraid to admit it. Thomas leaned across the wagon seat, his hand cupping her cheek as he kissed her, not the gentle, questioning kiss of the night before, but one filled with certainty and promise. Shall we go home? He asked when they parted. Celeste smiled, her heart fuller than she had believed possible. Yes. Let's go home. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Celeste Adams became Celeste Barrett in the same church where they had faced death together. This time, there were no hidden weapons, no watchful deputies, only friends, ranch hands, and the beginning of the family they would build together. Mrs. Figgins had outdone herself with Celeste's dress, transforming the blue gown into something truly special with intricate embroidery and seed pearls. Thomas, standing at the altar in a new suit, watched with undisguised adoration as she walked toward him. No regrets. He asked softly when she reached his side. Not one, she replied, taking his hands in hers. The Reverend smiled as he opened his Bible. Dearly beloved, he began, his voice carrying to the farthest corners of the church, we are gathered here today. Celeste hardly heard the familiar words, lost in the certainty of Thomas's gaze, the warmth of his hands holding hers. They had faced death together and chosen life, instead chosen to trust, to believe, to build something lasting in a world where nothing was guaranteed. They spoke their vows clearly, without hesitation. When Thomas slid the gold band onto her finger, crafted by Independence's jeweler from gold panned in a nearby creek, Celeste felt the final pieces of her heart mend and strengthen. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the Reverend declared. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Thomas's kiss was gentle, yet filled with promise, the first of countless kisses to come, of mornings and evenings and all the moments in between that would constitute their life together. Outside the church, autumn leaves danced around them as they emerged into sunshine. Friends offered congratulations, Mrs. Figgins dabbed at suspiciously moist eyes, and Sheriff Mills shook Thomas's hand with genuine warmth. Never thought I'd see the day, he remarked. Barrett settling down with a city woman, no less. Thomas's arm tightened around Celeste's waist. Best decision I ever made, Sheriff. As they prepared to depart for the wedding celebration at the ranch, Celeste caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd, Mrs. Holloway, the banker's wife from the stagecoach. Miss Adams, Mrs. Barrett now, I should say, she called, approaching with a smile. I wanted to wish you well. After everything that happened, it's wonderful to see happiness come from such terrible circumstances. Thank you, Celeste replied sincerely. How have you fared in Independence? Quite well. My husband's bank is thriving. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. And between us, I believe the West agrees with me far better than St. Louis ever did. Celeste laughed, recognizing her own journey in the woman's words. It has a way of doing that. The celebration at the Barrett Ranch continued well into the evening, tables set beneath lantern-strung trees, music from a fiddle and banjo encouraging dancing on the packed earth of the yard. Thomas proved surprisingly light on his feet, guiding Celeste through waltzes and reels with confident grace. Where did you learn to dance? She asked, breathless after a particularly lively number. He grinned, the expression transforming his usually serious face. My mother insisted. Said no son of hers would stomp around like a wounded buffalo at social gatherings. I shall have to thank her one day. A shadow crossed his features. She's been gone 10 years now, along with my father. Would have liked to see this day. Celeste touched his cheek gently. They're here in their way. In you. Later, as the celebration wound down and guests departed, Celeste stood on the porch of what was now truly her home, watching the last wagon disappear down the drive. Thomas joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Happy. He murmured against her hair, completely. She leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. And you, more than I thought possible. He turned her in his arms, his expression suddenly serious. There's something I need to show you, a wedding gift of sorts. Curious, she followed him inside and up the stairs, not to their bedroom but to the small study where he kept the ranch accounts. From a drawer in his desk, he withdrew a folded document, offering it to her with an uncharacteristically nervous gesture. "What's this?" she asked, unfolding the paper. "Deed to the ranch," he replied, "with your name added alongside mine." Celeste stared at the document, the legal language blurring through sudden tears. "Thomas, you don't need to." "Yes, I do." He took her hands, the deed still between them. "Everything I have is yours now, everything I am. No reservations, no conditions." The magnitude of his gift, not just the property, but the trust it represented, overwhelmed her. After James's betrayal, after being left with nothing, Thomas was offering her everything, freely and without hesitation. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll build this life with me." His blue eyes held hers, earnest and unwavering. "Good years and bad, whatever comes." Celeste set the deed aside and wrapped her arms around his neck. "I already promised that today," she reminded him, "in front of God and everyone in Independence." He smiled, pulling her closer. "So you did, Mrs. Barrett, so you did." Outside, the moon rose over the Barrett ranch, silvering the roof of the house where two people who had once lost everything had found something precious and rare, a love built not on illusion or convenience, but on truth, trust, and the courage to risk being fools together. Years later, Independence would still tell the story of Thomas Barrett and the Eastern woman who won his heart, how they faced down outlaws together, how they built one of the most successful ranches in the territory, how their children grew strong and true in the shadow of their parents' love. But in that moment, there was only the two of them, standing in a pool of lamplight, holding the future in their entwined hands, a future they would forge together, one day at a time, in this wild and beautiful land they now called home.